Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. We are just passing out of the introduction to the Sermon on the Mount and into the body of the teaching. And so the last 3 verses of the introduction, the blessing section, the Beatitudes, as they are called, we read just the end of that, where Jesus tells us something rather astonishing. Happy are you, blessed are you, favored of God. Things are going great for you if people make false accusations and accuse you and persecute you and revile you, and if you suffer for my name's sake. Again, we're just seeing this kind of upside-down world that Jesus is describing. This is the life of a follower of Jesus Christ. And then he moves into these statements. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And we're beginning now, as we just get into the body of Jesus' teaching, to see, wow, this is really, he's describing for us this impossible life. Now, you may have heard portions of these verses. You may have heard these statements, you're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world. But if you step back and think about it, these are really preposterous, right? I mean, just imagine I have a new neighbor who moves in, I go out back, I stand at the fence, and I meet this neighbor. Hey, how are you? Oh, I'm so-and-so, I'm so-and-so. Well, yeah, that's great. My name's Brian. I'm a pastor, but really, I'm the light of the world. I'm the salt of the earth. I mean, it's just, I'm going to tell you a story, and it's going to probably make you think less of me, and I apologize in advance. It was something I did really just to be funny. So please don't judge me right now. Just set aside judgment. In fact, we'll get to that in Matthew 7. Judge not, lest you be judged. But Beth and I were traveling. We were on vacation, and we had trouble getting to Colorado. Our airline had messed up our flight and had to shuttle us to Miami, and we flew out of Miami, and then we were coming home. We get to this little airport in Colorado, and they tell us, well, you're not going to, the flight is hours and hours late, and it's just getting later by the moment, and you're not going to get home until 6 tomorrow morning, right? So if you travel at all, you understand that these are moments for negotiating, right? They have failed to meet your expectations and to deliver according to what you want. So you have to tell them why they should compensate you, why they should give you travel vouchers and move you to first class and treat you special, and you are making your case. So Beth and I both just kick into gear, and it's a small airport, and no one else is around, and there are 4 attendants, and so for an hour and a half, we're trying to convince these people why this is just unacceptable. And after an hour and a half, a woman walks up to me, and she's in her mid-80s, and she said, "Excuse me, sir, but don't I know you from somewhere?" So I immediately start to replay the last hour and a half in my head. What have I said? What have I done? How have I acted? Have I done anything? And I'm thinking, I really don't want to answer her questions. What if she knows me? She goes, what is it that you do for a living? So please, again, don't judge me. I said to her, well, you're not going to believe it if I tell you, but I'm a male stripper. This is a true story, I'm afraid to tell you. I'm afraid to admit to you. And she says, without missing a beat, that's where I know you from. So, at this point, of course, the 4 flight attendants know that that is not true or possible. I just want to say for the record, I do not go to strip clubs. I have never danced. I can barely walk. So my wife says, come on, own up to it. Tell her what you do. And I tell her, well, I'm a pastor. Now, we had a sweet exchange, and what happens in that moment is I'm immediately aware that when I tell people what I do, there's an expectation of what I should be, how I should act, what I should do, and all of those things, right? And Jesus is communicating to you, when you're my follower, you're the light of the world. You're the salt of the earth. And you may choose to hide that so that people don't have an expectation that you're now associated with Jesus. But Jesus, his actual point is that it's unnatural for you to hide light. It's unnatural for you to be unsalty. This is a part of who you are. In fact, what he does here is if you think about it, it's really fascinating. He ends his introduction after telling you, this is the character of the person who follows me. This is the change I bring to their lives. This is the transformation that I bring. I bless them in extraordinary ways, and they are transformed from the inside out. Now, I pour out my grace, I pour out my mercy, I help you to become something you could never become on your own. However, don't make this mistake and think that blessing is just for you. That blessing is to flow through you to others. And immediately, Jesus begins to, as he closes out the introduction and then moves into the body of his teaching, he begins to teach us, you have a mission. You're experiencing my favor in order to share it, in order to spread it, in order to bless other people. This is a little opposite for us, a little backwards. We want to get to the end of the sermon. We want to be mature. We want to be at a certain level, and then we'll go on mission. Then we'll help other people. We want to kind of have our act together, but Jesus begins in this place. And this is a pattern for Jesus. In fact, in Matthew 4, as Jesus begins his earthly ministry in Matthew 3 and 4, he goes to call his very first apostles, the 12, and the first thing that Matthew records, Jesus saying to those followers is, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. From the very beginning. In fact, it's the first thing that Jesus does in Matthew's book, in his exchange with his followers, and then it's the last thing. If you go to the very end, the very last verses, he tells them, go and make disciples. All right, so we're called to bless other people, and the teaching is so powerful in that it carries this impact so that we don't just shine light, we are light. We don't just bring the benefits of salt. That's actually who we are. And it's showing us that the action and the essence are one. Let's get into it. Let's unpack it. The title is You Are, because it's so direct. You are the light of the world. And I'm going to break this down into 7 parts. So you are number one, different. The salt is different from the meat. The light is fundamentally different from the darkness. And the application that I think is most helpful and most likely what Jesus intended when he talked about salt was its feature of preserving and delaying or preventing decay. So for me, I think about salt, I think about flavor and seasoning. But in a time when there was no refrigeration and things would go bad very quickly, I think the main application here is one of preservation. And in order for the salt to be effective, it comes in as an other than agent. It comes in as something other than the meat. And this is important for us to understand something about strategy, if I could use that word, in terms of how does the church operate, how do Christians live. It is not that fundamentally we try to be like everyone else. There is a difference in who God calls us to be. And in fact, John Stott thinks that that's the theme of the entire teaching that Jesus gives, is that later when Jesus is comparing Jesus' disciples to other people, he says, you are not to be like them. This is the way people normally act. You're not to be that way. Now, I get it. That's a little dangerous in that we don't want to be puffed up and I'm better than and I'm different than. It's not about what we claim of ourselves. It is a desire to say, in order to be what God calls me to be, there's something different about my life. Number 2. Let me just do this before I move to the second point, and just point out something for you that's rather fascinating to help you understand probably what I think is the theme of the teaching. Right before the Sermon on the Mount begins, in Matthew 4, okay. We would like to stop right now and give again. We've counted the offering and it's not enough. We're doing a facelift. You've seen that, right? Okay, here we are. Matthew 4. Just before the Sermon on the Mount begins, this summary statement is given. Jesus went throughout all of Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. Notice that phrase. Proclaiming the good news of his kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. So there's a preaching, teaching aspect, a word aspect, and then a doing, a deed aspect. Christians, we love other people in word, with our message, and with our actions, and Jesus models that, and this is the summary. Okay? Then if you go to Matthew 9, verse 35, the end of Matthew chapter 9, you have a very similar summary statement. Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and doing what? Proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction. All right, so you have these two summary statements, and in between, you have this teaching that we have called the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, 7, and then 2 chapters that are healing stories, Matthew 8 and 9. And I think what you have is, these are bookends. This is a section of Matthew's book. And he tells you this is what Jesus did, and in between, he gives you a description of it. The teaching, Matthew 5, 6, 7, and then the healing, Matthew chapters 8 and 9, right? Now you say, okay, great. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that the theme of the Sermon on the Mount is the kingdom of God. This is what it looks like to live in the kingdom. This is what it looks like to be a citizen of God's kingdom. And that we immediately should think about Jesus reigning in our lives. Jesus is the Lord of our lives. In fact, that's the basic Christian confession, according to the Apostle Paul. No one can say Jesus is Lord unless the Holy Spirit is at work in them, helping them to see that, helping them to do that. 1 Corinthians 12:3. Jesus is Lord. It's unthinkable for a Christian to think, well, I want God to save me. I want to be forgiven of my sin. I want to go to heaven. I want to live forever, but I'm not going to live for Jesus. I have no desire to live for Jesus. That's unthinkable. When Jesus comes in and cleanses us, He gives us a new heart, and even though we're immature and we have a lot of growing to do, there's a desire for Jesus to be the Lord of our lives, and a growth and a progression that carries us through all of life. So, you are different, right? But that's because of who Jesus is, and Jesus is in you. Number 2, you are needed. You are needed. Fundamentally, the two metaphors of salt and light, Jesus is saying it's contrary to nature for salt to lose its saltiness, and for light to be used in a way other than what is its obvious purpose. We don't hide light, whether it's in a house, and it's really impossible to hide light. It's a part of the nature, the intrinsic nature of what it is. And that the world needs you to be who you are fundamentally as called by Jesus. And then the next two unpack that. And I'm going to summarize them with these two words. You are preventing, and then you are spreading. You are preventing and you are spreading. And I'm thankful to Tim Keller, pastor, teacher, professor, writer, popular writer. And he really does a great job of unpacking these two ideas, that the two metaphors of salt and light, one is primarily negative and one is largely positive, that the church and the Christian has a role of preventing the negative, preventing decay, preventing corruption, preserving what is good in the world and in culture and in society, and then an on the offense kind of application, a positive spreading of what is right, influencing in a way of bringing change, the light shining. So that there are, in any given moment, and then Keller makes this, he does a great job just presenting this case. He says, listen, you can look in society, especially like Western society, all of Europe, Western Europe, the Americas, and you look at our culture and our history and our thinking, you see right now a lot of Christian thought that is underneath everything that's happening. The basic idea that every person is equal and every person has rights and that people should be treated equally with the same rights. You really find the roots of that in our culture and society in this very sermon and in the teaching of Jesus. Quite often the ideas that are presented here would be very radical and contrary to culture, but they've been absorbed deeply into Western thinking. However, so there's a place where as Christians we want to get into that space and preserve the erosion of that, the decay. But at the same time, we have an influence, a change to bring. So that more and more what's happening is society, culture, is moving away from the foundations of why we can say every person is of value and with dignity and equal. That the denial of God and the denial of ultimate the ultimate existence and of right and wrong, the severing of that removes the ethic from the foundation, right? So that understanding every person is of value. Well, why? And what does that look like as it's lived out? We have a place to come and say, listen, that has to be attached to, and that is in us because God exists and we are made in His image. When you lose that, you eventually will lose the ethic that is built on that foundation. Are you with me? So preventing and also spreading. And again, and this is language that I borrow from Keller. He says that means Christians go in where others want to run. And that's our fifth point. As Christians, we are going in. When we get around situations where people are hurting and messed up and battling problems, we're often aware that if I get involved in this situation, I'm going to get so entangled, and do I even want to? And there's a place for us as Christians that Jesus is saying, I'm calling you to go in. I'm calling you to get involved. I'm calling you to be salt and to be light. I'm calling you to be others focused. I'm calling you to be a blessing to other people. I'm calling you not to be indifferent or detached, but to be involved and available and accessible. Now, I think part of what we learn in the teaching of Jesus is that we don't apply that legalistically, but the Spirit of God leads us in it so that it's life-giving, but we participate, we get involved. So, a great picture of that, John Ensor tells a story that Eva Fogelman tells in her book, Conscience and Courage, about World War II. A Polish teenager, Władysław was his first name, and he was, the Germans took Władysław and said, listen, you're going to have to work in this concentration camp, and we want you to oversee this group of inmates. And so there were 30 women that he was in charge of, and they were running a little rabbit farm so the rabbits could be harvested and furs could be made to keep soldiers warm on the Russian front. And Władysław personally began to just care for these enslaved women in the concentration camp. And he would smuggle food in, potatoes and bread and vegetables in his pockets and on his person in order to feed them. And then one day, a woman took ill, and she contracted this mysterious infection, and she had sores all over her body, all over her arms. And he knew that if the soldiers saw those sores, they would immediately kill her. And so here he was in a place where he needed to hide her. He could not smuggle a doctor in, so what would he do? And so he took the most direct route. He infected his blood with her blood. And then, listen to this, he went to a doctor, received diagnosis, got medicine, shared the medicine with her, treated himself, treated her. They both were cured, and they both survived the war. Now that's going in, isn't it? That's a whole new measure of going in. And of course, what we want to do is just think about, it is the parable of the Good Samaritan. If you're familiar with that story that Jesus told, Gospel of Luke, it's recorded, right? We are aware that once I align myself with someone who's really in a desperate position, who's really hurting, all of the risk that they're facing in some way or another endangers me. And no one's saying for a moment, we dismiss the idea that we need wisdom in terms of how we go in, but Jesus is calling us to go in. Number 6. It's sobering, isn't it? Right? Are you thinking right now, Brian, could you just lift us up a little bit right now? All right, I'm going to lift you up right now. We're also rejoicing. Okay, this is amazing. This is what Jesus tells you to do. He says, listen, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to pour out my blessing on your life. It's going to be so extravagant. You're going to be a new you, and you will be the light of the world. And you don't just do it for you. You will be a blessing to other people. And oh, by the way, some people are going to try to kill you because you do it. You'll be persecuted. You'll be reviled. False things will be said about you. And you'll be so happy. I don't know, right? So there's an association that Jesus is making. He's saying, you will be blessed and experience blessing because you're associated with me and you're associated with the prophets, and that's how they were treated. And when that happens, when you're persecuted for righteousness' sake, when you're persecuted for me, you'll know it's because you're being light, because you're being salt, and you're in my kingdom, and you're completely blessed, and you'll rejoice. Now, notice very carefully that when Jesus gives us his teaching, he tells us that you don't rejoice when you're persecuted because you're obnoxious, because you're difficult, because you're clueless, because you're insensitive. In fact, there's an interesting reference. Peter takes this on more than once in his writings. And in 1 Peter 4:15, he says, let none of you suffer. He's telling people how to suffer for Christ. But he says, by the way, don't suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer, right? But then he adds this, as a meddler. I don't know, murder, meddling, it's a pretty big scale. He's talking about a busybody, someone who's just insensitively butting in and meddling, and he says, that's going to provoke opposition. Don't suffer because of that. There's a place where we're to be sensitive to our environment, sensitive to our world, sensitive to what people are going to hear and how they're going to hear it. We don't change our message, but there is a place where when we go in, we're not being indifferent or insensitive. But when we go in and we receive opposition, we want to rejoice. Some of you have heard me tell this story before, but there's a time when, many years ago, the mayor of Coral Springs asked me and some other spiritual leaders periodically to pray. And so at one time, many years ago, the church was located in Coral Springs. I was asked to pray at a city commission meeting. So I go into this meeting, and I would pray, and they would have rabbis and pastors and all kinds of people from different faiths and no faith at all come in. I don't know when you have no faith at all who you pray to, but they had those people come and pray as well. And so one day I'm in the mayor's office, and he says, Brian, actually I received a letter, and then I went to the office to follow up. And the letter said, Brian, you cannot pray at the city commission meetings in the name of Jesus. I'm like, wow, that's rough. So as I can, picture me there at the counter in that little airport, this is time to negotiate, right? This is time to get aggressive. But very nicely, I went to the mayor and I said, Mayor, I come in to pray, and I'm going to be sensitive that not everyone is of my faith. I get that. I'm not pushing anything. But when you now ask me to deny Jesus, now you put me in a tough spot, because I can't do that. So then I asked the mayor this question. I said, Mayor, have you told rabbis not to mention Moses? Have you told, can people pray to Muhammad? Can people pray? Is there any other name or anyone else that can't be mentioned? No, just Jesus. I said, well, I don't know. This doesn't seem right to me. I think what we want is you're achieving your environment of respect and equality by just asking. It'd be a problem if you ask only me. But you're asking everybody to come in, but you're only telling Christian pastors, we're going to censor your prayer. There's something about Jesus and how he comes in to transform. He makes a claim on your life that's so radical, it's so revolutionary that you can't be indifferent if you really understand who he is and what he claims. Right? You are put in a place, and tragically, that mayor ended up in jail. Just really sad story, and I had a chance to visit him on Christmas Eve in prison, and he wrote me the kindest letter afterwards, saying that he felt completely abandoned. His imprisonment was very shameful, and it was in the papers. And I think, friends, that in a very imperfect way, God orchestrated an opportunity for me to love on a man who, in a very small way, rejected Christ in me. And we have a long way to go in terms of our growth in that, but that's what Jesus is telling us to do. And the rejoicing comes because, oh man, this is a validation of who I am, and that God is at work and he will work. All right, here's the last one. Number 7. We're also giving thanks. That's the context of it all in terms of as we're rejoicing, but we're also aware that God is at work, that God is orchestrating events and laying those events out before us, and there's a place for us to just overflow with gratitude. All right, now, so listen to me. This is for me, I was praying on this passage, meditating on it, and thinking about it, and this was so energizing for me when I began to see this. You see, Thanksgiving is something that Christians are told to do all the time in every circumstance. I could go to multiple verses. I'll just give you 1 or 2 examples, right? We're told, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus. You go to the ticket counter, you're in Colorado, you're tired, your wife wants to get home. I'm not going to get home till 6 in the morning. I'm so happy. Thank you. I don't want to give thanks in that circumstance, right? I have to rent a car now. I have to drive to Denver 3 hours away. Oh, what a hardship, right? I'm going to tell you, there is something in me that wants to get so aggressive, so ugly. Come on, you can relate, right? Shame on you. Okay, stay with me, right? God's saying, I'm going to do such a transformation in you that you just quit living for your comfort and your selfishness so you can hoard, so you can have, so you can coast through life. I am going to make you a blessing whether you like it or not. And you will like it. You will love it. You will relish it because I'm transforming your heart. Now, here's part of how stay with this is deep. The essence and the action are one, and they flip. Because what will happen is, if you begin to, I can't explain it, but there I am, having my quiet time, I'm saying, wow, this stuff works. This is true. Thanksgiving is to characterize everything about us and everything we do because God is in control and He saved us. And this isn't just random, it's all purposeful. And He's doing something outside of us, He's doing something in us. God is so faithful, He's so merciful. I would have given up on me a long time ago, and look at how God's working, and I'm just so encouraged. Now, listen, essence and action. So what happens is, if that essence gets in you, a heart of gratitude, your response, your action of giving thanks through life will be salt and light. It will be radical. I'm not talking about a Pollyanna kind of, oh, everything's great. I'm talking about a real-time, in the trenches, gratitude that I'm full of the hope of Jesus Christ. Right? So, Beth and I were laughing because I'll almost end on this. That means I'm not going to end on this. Beth and I are laughing because I can't explain it. We spend 5 days in the mountains, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful. But we just wanted to get home, right? So my dear wife, she says to me, I can't do this. I can't do this. Now, this is a scary thing for a husband when a wife announces, I can't do this. I'm like, I don't know. What does that mean? Right? So, this is like, okay, I'm going to pull my wife aside. Sweetheart, I can do a lot of things, but I cannot get this plane here. And she's, of course, laughing at me. She's just expressing, like, this is not what I wanted. But there was this moment where something flipped, and we said, hey, look at this. God's given us an extra 12 hours of vacation time, right? And let's just enjoy it. And by God's grace, we did, right? We did. Now, that's not a real trial. I get that. It's minor. But it does illustrate the challenge, and this is where I'll end. I want to remind you this because I want you to see it as a grid for us as we move through the Sermon on the Mount. The beauty, the lunacy, and the glory. So I look at what Jesus instructs here, and he says, your life is going to shine so brightly because of me and you that others will see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. You're going to be a blessing. Isn't it beautiful to consider a person who's so blessed and in the same way is a blessing to other people, as opposed to a person who's blessed and hoards it and keeps it from others? Do you see the beauty of what Jesus is calling us to? At the same time, you see the lunacy of it, the impossibility of always being others-focused. This week, there was an ultra marathon in Death Valley. So in California, there's what they call the Badwater 135. These people, they run 135 miles. This just happened, they start at 11 o'clock at night because it's so hot. At 11 o'clock at night, it was 104 degrees. And only 100 people qualify for this ultramarathon, and they start running. The next day, it reached 127 degrees, right? The winner took almost 25 hours. So runs all night, all day, and just before midnight, the next night finishes. They have a team of people that help them do this. They carry like 10, 12 pairs of shoes because their shoes melt. And the last few pair of shoes are a size, and then 2 sizes bigger because their feet swell. Right? Not only do they run this 135 miles, they call it the toughest foot race in the world. Yeah, right? Not only that, but they go from way below sea level to 8,000. They ascend 13,000 feet in altitude over the course of 135 miles. Right? Just shoot me now. Right? Their team has to make sure they drink 20 ounces of fluid every 2 miles. And at the end, the guy who won the race, his team was just having to point him in the right direction because he couldn't run in a straight line. Now, if I tell you that, right, it's like, that's amazing, right? It's amazing what people can do physically. Now, there is a point, like, if I tried to do that, I'd just say, no, that's just impossible. I've trained my whole life. That will never happen, right? Now, what if we double it? It's the Badwater 270. What if we make it times 10, right? There is a point where no human anywhere ever at any time could accomplish that physically. Well, what are the spiritual limitations that you face when it comes to forgiving and helping and blessing and loving and demonstrating the life of Christ? The life that Jesus calls you to is way beyond your natural capacity. And when it's taken seriously, it does seem crazy. But that's the glory of it. Jesus is transforming those who trust in him into something really magnificent. A supernatural light of God shining through you.